Thank you for being here today. I wanted to talk today about how we can use duality to our benefit. Because we live in this world that one of the laws are duality, and a lot of different pieces. I think where I'll start with is how duality has been coming up for me in the martial arts side, and we can pull that out into kind of our practice and then living in this world. And on the martial arts mat, there are a lot of things happening simultaneously. But before we get to that place where things are moving together in harmony and in balance, we start with moving one thing at a time well. So it might be first focusing on our posture, and then maybe focusing on our balance, and then maybe focusing on strength, and then it goes into flexibility. But it's very one pointed, focus. And eventually you polish that so that you have all of those happening at the same time. So I imagine kind of like a physical anatomy of a human body when it's walking, you know. There's not only the turning of kind of the hip joint, there's also the bending and flexing on the knee joint. And then there's also this kind of rotational thing happening with our pelvis, our pelvic bowl. And that is what I imagine when we work in this realm of duality, where at first, in order to build up our strengths, we focus on one thing. So we focus on how to walk in a straight line. And then eventually from that straight line, we learn to be able to curve it so that we can then walk in a circle. And in essence, we never lose that straight line, nor do we lose that circle. So what I think of is when we do hand movements in Aikido, there are 3 specific hand movements, which we do so that we can evade, redirect, or deflect an attack. And when that happens, people think that, oh, I'm just evading this attack, or I'm just redirecting this attack, or I'm just moving out of the way. That's only just one side of it. That's only one part, one side of the duality. There's another side, kind of black and white. So the other side of it is there's also an entering, there's also an engaging. And if you're seeing kind of, if we do one of the deflections, you kind of meet the attack and you'll redirect. When you redirect, it kind of moves off to the side. So kind of like you've pulled yourself into a different driving lane, if that makes sense. But people forget that there's more to it, and there's also an entering that needs to happen, and that entering happens in a intentional way. It's not I just redirect and I'm kind of in my own lane. You have to redirect and you're also moving forward. And I say this because if you're on a martial arts mat and you're constantly redirecting or you're deflecting a move, 2 things tend to happen. You end up eventually getting overpowered by the attacks because you haven't engaged, you haven't actually engaged to return an attack, that you get overpowered and then you get stuck and you get kind of boxed in, and eventually you're losing. Otherwise, if you constantly are deflecting and you don't have an entering move, then you can eventually leave yourself into a corner because you've kind of like maneuvered all the different places, but they keep kind of entering. Then you kind of can back yourself into a corner. Does that make sense? And I find this to be very true, specifically when we're on the mat and you're practicing with another partner. And this specific practice we were doing was a continuous attacks. So it's not just the one attack and then you can do your counter attack. It was continuous attacks. So you had to counter and counter and counter. But you realize very quickly that you can counter and get off the line, but because they're continuous, they're right back on top of you. And so you've deflected, you've got out of the way, like, I'm out of the way. Oh, there's another one. Oh, you got to get out of the way. Oh, and so you've never actually appropriately dealt with the situation because it's still in your face. So after maybe you deflect and redirect to a certain extent where you feel comfortable and you have enough space to execute something, then you need to be engaging and move forward and direct an attack or a technique, execute a technique, such that that person can either fall or, move in such a way or be thrown, so that they're out of their flow of their continuous attack. And it was really interesting because one of the gentlemen that I was working with, I kept attacking and he kept kind of evading because he just didn't really feel comfortable enough to go in for attack. And I was just on him, and you kind of think of this like, the zombie apocalypse scene where all the zombies are on you because they're just too much and they're swarming on you. You keep trying to evade and attack. You don't want to get bitten, to get infected by the zombie thing. But he wasn't dealing with the situation. He was moving himself out of the way, but I was still in his face until I addressed that and we were working that out. I was like, oh, you can't just keep moving around me. You have to deal with me, head on. And once he did, and he kind of threw me or he did a technique, then that was kind of like the end of that chapter. We can move on to the next. And this is really key when we have multiple attackers on the Aikido mat, because if you are trying to evade all the different attackers, you literally are that one person trying to run away from the mob, and the mob is just following you wherever you're at. Does that make sense? And it doesn't deal with anything except you're exerting a lot of energy running. And understandably, that's where initial nervous system goes to. We go into fight or flight, and the flight is very prevalent. So we kind of tense up and we want to get ourselves out of that situation. Hopefully in training in martial arts, you get past that place of running. You may still feel the rise of that instinctual feeling of running, and you'll feel it. And instead you kind of, settle into kind of the training, the foundation that you have built for yourself, so that you have the inclination to run, but instead you set yourself up properly to be able to deal with the attacks coming on. And if that means you evade and redirect the first two attacks, the third one you execute something. So that person has been taken down. So now you go back and readdress the two because they've been evaded, they're going to come back onto you again. Maybe you redirect one time and then you execute on the second, person. So then you're essentially whittling down the mob that is coming at you such that you slowly, eventually take care of all of them, so there's no one else standing and it's just you. And therefore, success, right? And how I see that in regards to our life is when we start this practice, we focus and put a lot of time and energy and intent on having and cultivating stillness in our lives. And when we do that, that's wonderful because we build this great, strong foundation for our practice. But eventually we have to all move beyond that, because it becomes unrealistic to just have only stillness in your life in that sense that I'm just going to sit on my meditation cushion. It's not the world we live in today. We work and we have relationships, we have family, we have obligations. So there is this ability to hold kind of two worlds, the very still world and also the very active world that looks like going out to buy groceries and running errands and filling up the gas tank, amidst this stillness that we have cultivated in our practice. And we at first feel like it's either or. It's either stillness or it's activity, and it feels like a seesaw. And eventually we work to so that it's blended and it's integrated and it's both at the same time. And how I imagine that another Aikido martial art example is we're working on these attacks this week where we'd have two attackers, but they're pulling and holding on to either one of your arms. So one attacker's on your right side and they have their hands on your one arm, and then the other attacker is on the left side holding on to your left arm. And they have you kind of split apart. And you're supposed to address this attack and handle the situation. And what we find, again, we resort back to this fight or flight nervous system in our system, where we want to disengage our right shoulder that's being attacked, by the person on the right side, and we want to deal with this person on the left. And that's actually incorrect. You're actually needing to create a connection to both attackers at the same time, and continuing with that connection on both sides, you then allow the connection. Let's say you want to deal with the attacker on the left. You allow the connection to the attacker on the right to be your anchor point to be able to then deal with the left. Does that make sense? And by that, but what I mean by anchor is you actually utilize them as like a grounding point versus disengaging, have this kind of right arm flopping in the air, becoming unstable by that, trying to stay in a semi-balanced way and engaging in this thing very one-sided that feels like struggle. And how I can explain the feeling of it is instead of feeling like you have all these different disconnected parts in your body as you're dealing with each attacker on right and left side, is you've unified your own body system so that you're connected. So the whole piece, left and right attacker, becomes one whole. And in that wholeness place, do you go and deal with the left attacker, and then do you deal with the right attacker? Does that make sense? I'm trying to explain it and have this image in my mind as I was sharing it with you guys. And that place that we get to of that wholeness integrated part, while we're in this world that feels very much like it's splitting us, to very opposing things and opposing activities and duality, that if we can move ourselves from the current foundation we've created from our practice, that one pointed focus, and we bring in the other aspect of the opposing aspect, we're able to unify that and integrate that as the whole and move from there forward. We become much more effective in being able to dealing with each of the situations coming into our lives, and dealing with it in such a way where we aren't overwhelmed by it, we aren't crushed by it, we aren't cornered by it, we aren't boxed in by it. But we do it in such a way where even if we may feel like both sides are being, held, prisoner or something like that, that there's still freedom there to be able to move and engage in such a way that still comes out to be successful. Does it make sense? Questions on that so far? That part? Yes. It actually, what it feels like is when they there's two different levels too of these side attacks. People who just stand there and you have kind of movement of your arms, and you have to kind of have a place of connection for both of them, so that you've kind of essentially use the word attached to them. It's like you've sealed yourself to them, so that becomes that piece, and then you can move from there. But then the other piece of it is when they stretch you, like you're on a stretching thing and they're attacking you, but they're pulling you apart. So they're not letting you move close to them to engage. And that piece actually, we fall into wanting to use our shoulders and our elbows, so that's where the struggle comes from when we're trying to work these joints. But actually, if we can engage the lats and down into our back, it connects us to the center. And it's crazy when you can kind of squeeze your lats together and engage your whole back muscles while they're, yanking you apart. I can't really explain it, but you are able to move. The sense is you move your whole body, and by moving your whole body, the attackers no longer have control or no longer have the attack, because you operating from your whole system where you have authority, whereas all they have is they just have authority over this one little limb. Yet our mind get caught up in, oh my gosh, they got our limb, they've caught our whole body, and we're bound, and that's not the case. Yeah. But in the tricky part is, in the second degree black belt test, where they're yanking both sides and then they have an attacker on the leg holding them down. And I haven't gone there yet. From what I saw her do, was she was able to engage her body such that her whole one side, she moved down to deal with the person at the leg first. And actually the one when you deal the leg is pretty easy, because normally they're hugging so tight, you just kind of peel their face away. And kind of like dogs when you see them walking on a leash, there are certain dog leashes that go just around the mouth. And it's not to clamp their muzzle or anything like that. It's just a leash where it guides just by their head. And the science behind that, the research is, dogs go where their head goes. So if their head turns, their body's going to follow. And therefore, there's a lot less weight and struggle when you're just moving the head versus the whole torso body. And it's like a bobsled. You're like, I want to go in that direction. And you don't. So, that's how I saw her deal with that guy that was holding on to her leg. She went for the face and went, peel. And he was like, okay, I'm done.
What about the senior?
Yeah, I was on her test. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, it was on her. You can come down and visit for a test. Yeah. She was so kick butt. Any other questions? Does that make sense? You're shaking your head. Oh, no questions. I gotcha.
How does that relate to our practice?
So how I brought that into our practice, going back, speaking more about kind of the stillness that we cultivate on the mat, and then going out into the world that feels like it's full of action. We talk about relinquishing all of our attachments, right? Because attachments are the root of our suffering. And till we get to that place, and as we're working towards that, we can utilize the attachments we do have to bring us to where we want to go. And how I imagine that was with regards to the attackers pulling on either side, is even though you want to be not attached to either one of them, right? And not be attacked and be on your merry way, in this world, you're attacked, and then in order to deal with it, you have to attach to them, if that makes sense. But I don't think of it attached. I think of it as connect with them instead of being averse. I don't want to deal with you. No. I don't want any of that kind of negativity or something like that. You connect with them, and that connection piece has a sense of acceptance. And the acceptance neutralizes the struggle. So it's not this tug of war happening. It's like, okay, you're pulling me this way. I will meet that equal equal to it so that it becomes neutral. And when you can neutralize that point, then you can utilize that as kind of your base to deal with the other thing happening in life on the other side. And because of how our bodies are structured, if we have an attack on either arm and we let one arm go limp and we just deal with this one attack, we end up becoming unbalanced because that left side has gone limp, if you will. So all we're trying to do is fight this attacker with our right side. And because we become unbalanced, the attacker can actually feel the struggle and they can stop us. But if we, and they can feel that imbalance. But if we become balanced on both left and right side, it's like a full unit, like 100% wholeness. The attacker is unable to feel on the subtle physical level how you are going to move them to counter the attack with a technique. Does that make sense? Because it comes from the place of fullness. Yeah? Yeah? You can see that, imagine that? Yeah. Because if you're being attacked by the same person and one hand on one hand is being held and you exert 90% force here and 10% force here, they feel that discrepancy. But if you have 50-50, the moment you move, let's say with this hand, they actually are unable to tell because in their mind and in their body system, the felt sense, it feels neutral. Does that make sense? It feels like that object that's coming at you and you don't know how fast it's coming. It's like a driving thing. I can't think of it, if that makes sense. Like our not blindness, but our inability to differentiate the difficulty of that when cars are driving in a certain direction towards us because of that trajectory. It's similar to that with regards to executing the technique when you're using your whole body versus just one. Yeah. And let me add to that is to say, if we're talking about the attacks coming from grabbing the wrist, if we not lock up, if we load up through our shoulders or we load up through our elbows, that is the same concept. Is you have, let's say, the attack here. If you meet the attack, let's say it's 50%, you meet it with also a 50% kind of a connection place. If you load an extra 10% on your shoulder into that, they feel that and they will stop you.
So they up the end.
Yes, so if you want to grab my hand for a moment, grab my wrist up here. Okay. You can, yeah. So this, if I was just meet it, that's neutral. That's what I feel is neutral. But if I add to that, do you feel that?
Yeah.
And it's faster when I add to it. It's faster than, because these signals come from our spine. It's as fast as if we were to put our hand on a hot stove. So there's no,
Yes, exactly.
there's no like I'm showing you my shoulder and then you can't even think about it. It's you feel it
Immediately.
immediate.
Yeah.
But if I don't do that and I just keep at neutral, I can just move. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
But if I was to hold
guard down.
Yeah, yes. It makes the body feel like it's, but if I struggle, you fight that.
Yes.
Right.
I got it now. Thank you.
So that piece around, that's another piece around, when we meet things in our lives, aspects that we consider it to be an attack on the Aikido mat, something that we don't want, is uncomfortable, we don't like dealing with it. If we come to a place of acceptance, to that neutrality, then you can move and keep that. You can deal with that situation appropriately without being taken out by that. And it feels it has a feeling of effortlessness. But if we meet that and we can't accept it and we feel like we gotta muscle and get into it, and it's the struggle. And the struggle exerts all this energy and you aren't necessarily any more efficient. And that's what we try to cultivate in this practice, and how we can utilize duality towards our benefit. Because, we don't want to essentially be attached. We want to live in our happy, bright, beautiful space of stillness and, be done with that. But that also is kind of that is a fantasy, and that can be what do they call it? Not the bypassing, but delusion. Bypass. Okay. I'm thinking another word. Bypassing, and then like escapism. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, escapism. Yeah. And realistically, it is, getting into that with our intelligence of our practice, getting into it such that we are neutral, as centered as possible, so that we can deal with it and then move on to next. And, I had to get very honest with myself a couple weeks ago. It's like, oh, interesting. This actually came after watching the movie Kubo. Because one of the lines in there was talking about how, oh, you're getting more powerful. That also means there's, the world's going to be a little bit more dangerous for you. And even though we go into these beautiful worlds of light and they're beautiful and ecstatic, to come out of that and we've increased our own awareness and power, it's idealistic to go around and say, oh, it's just puppies and sunshines, rainbows all day. And of course you want to be strategic in not walking into any kind of like tar pit, if there is any, if it's obvious. And part of the nature and the laws we live by in this world is there will be those attacks. To think that you're going to get on the Aikido mat and you're just going to evade and redirect every single buddy gets you cornered, or it gets you overpowered. It becomes that mob scene of zombies that just slowly, overtake you. You have to engage. That is the dualistic nature. It's like, no, we don't want to fight. We want to be peaceful and pacifistic. Oh, okay, understand. And we have to also know and be willing and capable of executing a technique and throwing when the time is appropriate. Not in a mean, aggressive, violent way, but in a that was appropriate to the situation, and that is the balance to the other side of evading and redirecting. I think of one of the black belt teachers who was telling us about this whole evading thing. He's like, you don't just move it out of your way and you're great. He's like, you move out of the way and you bring your shoulder in like you're going somewhere. I'm like, oh my God, but it really has to have that intent. Otherwise you just push it out of the way and then come back and push you back over. So we forget that piece. And that's why I bring in the kind of anatomy sense of all the different moving parts. First we think, oh, we can sit in stillness. It's wonderful. Yeah, now we got to sit in stillness while we're walking, while we're doing, while we're interacting and having relations. We be able to sit in stillness while rageful anger is happening. All those things. All those things. And yes, hence the practice for sure. Questions? No. Mind blown. Practice.
It's very easy to visualize when it's an external thing.
Like a attack or something like that kind of way. Let me think.
Blockage.
Let me see if I can find an example in life that's not like on the martial arts mat. I'm kind of thinking of what's coming up for me is the substance treatment clinic that I work at, that I do counseling at. Because of how the structure of this clinic works, the clients come and spend majority of their day there. So their days are structured at the clinic with groups, with psychoeducation classes, with workshops, art class activity and so forth like that, as well as in that time they get pulled out and they see their therapist like me or something like that, and or their case manager. And initially when I first went there into this structure, I was very used to clients being separate. And by that I mean they would schedule appointments with a therapist and you would see them in that block of time, and then that would be done for that. So very structured and separated, like this very clear boundary. And in the substance treatment program, the structure is not like that. The boundary of that does not exist. It has, how can I say fluid? I don't want to say fluid. There are no boundaries. I'll just say that. And so coming into that, trying to place that expectation around, it's going to be separate. You are you and I am me, and you're going to be there and I'm going to see you, and this is how it's going to be. Very clean, if you will, in my mind. As practitioners, we're always having to engage with them in some way. And I end up having to find my own center and balance without any boundaries. It's almost as if I felt like I was very used to and very comfortable, being like the water or the tea in the teacup. I had a specific structure that I can fill. And I do my job, drink tea and so forth like that. But in this industry and in this clinic, there was no mug. So I was just kind of like liquid spilled everywhere. I'm like, okay, how does this look? And how can I be effective? And what ended up happening, a couple of things, is I put kind of a baseline structure down of, okay, what it looked like, what expectations I had to meet during that week, clients that I had to see. So those were kind of my big rocks throughout the week, all the different individual clients and then the groups. And the rest of the time became an allowing of doing the work, administrative and or tending to the staff who are having issues with the clients and or the clients themselves. And over that, you polish a system up so that when I go in at the beginning of the week, the allowing of fires to be put out or staff issues that they need to be, spoken to doesn't feel like it's gonna overwhelm me or break me. Because before, what I was doing was I was kind of redirecting. It's like, oh, I'm gonna deal with that later. But I wasn't engaging. Does that make sense? I didn't have the added piece. So then I felt overwhelmed because I kept redirecting. It's like, I don't want to touch that fire. I don't want to touch that fire. Oh no, don't go over there. Okay, but that, so I was doing this, right? Oh, ooh, you're kind of negative. Oh, this, so there's this aversion thing that kind of starts happening. But essentially I was evading like this. And they could feel that. And so it's like, then they wanted more. And it's like, oh my, and then there's like the zombie crowd, right? Flop. So I can imagine. But in letting that go and being able to redirect, but engage in another way and connect and give them time and truly present moment and be vested. And essentially what it looked like for me is being connected to the clients, having the rapport, having the relationship, and having that connection allowed for me to neutralize myself and not create all this, oh, we want all this from her. It was not so much they weren't feeling this from me anymore. It's like I can redirect and I'm here. What do you need? And I will engage with you, engage fully till that was complete and then move on. And if I need to redirect something, then I connect in some other way. So it's really kind of beautiful to see, because ironically, you don't think that by engaging and evading, I would have more time, but actually do have more time on my hands. It's awesome. And I'm like in my office and it's quiet and people aren't disturbing me. And if they do need to disturb, then I engage and stuff like that. But there's a lot more space in my week instead of feeling like the zombies are coming on because I keep trying to, no, it's okay. Or the felt sense from them that I was running away, right? Or trying to evade them. And the mom's like, no, we need you, we need you, we need you. And instead, like, okay, that's not my issue, but what you need me for this, I can deal with that, or something like that,
So you change your perspective.
I changed my perspective, and that came about through one, acceptance and connection. Even though the underlying aspect of my defense mechanism or whatever nervous system wants to detach and be avoiding that population, that individual or person. And the more I find myself that I have that notion to be averse to it, it's like I work on that by wanting to see that client like first in the beginning of me, to engage and not be running away from it all week long, Yes. It's not always perfect. Sometimes I get a few days into the week, Does that help? Is that
Yeah.
great? Okay, good.
Understand.